Ah. Hi, Lee. Yeah.
Hello.
Hello. Hi. Nice
Is that
to meet
Martin?
you. Jan.
Jan. Oh, hi, Jan.
We met last year, right? In
Yes, I
Warwick.
recognize you. Yes,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
did.
And I will present again. Yeah. Joanna just asked me to kind of co-chair the session with you from here, right? Probably you will
Thank you.
be
Yeah.
You will have the lead online, and I try just to do everything with the microphone and whatever. Is it okay for you?
Yeah. That's exactly perfect. I had asked her to do that.
Cool. Yeah. Nice. And how do you want to do the Q&A? So we will do first all the 4 presentations and then Q&A, or after each presentation questions?
How has it been working at the conference so far? Have people preferred it?
Different.
Just different ways.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, maybe we could do 2. In the last one of the sessions I really liked, we did first 2 and then ask questions, and then the second 2. So there wasn't too long between the presentations and the questions.
Okay, yeah. So then I let you then introduce this forum to the audience. Is it okay?
Yep, sure.
Or should I or to the speakers especially?
Yeah, well, let's just have a look. So what are we? This theme is a theme of, I just have to find the
So you will be starting anyway, right, with your talk?
Yeah, that's right. And I'm just trying to find the what's the name of our theme that we're in?
Social and ecological systems, something like that.
That's right. So we're social and ecological systems.
Yes.
Okay, so I've got everybody here. We've got myself, then we've got Yun Xiao Huang, talking about ecos.
Yes.
Right. Okay, good. Jan, that's Jan, that's you.
That's me, yeah.
And then we've got Martin. Okay, good.
That's good, yeah.
It's all of us ecologist types hanging out together. That's cool.
Really, really great, really, because last year, remember last year we were this really small group at Friday with Doug, you, I think. Right. And I was the only one presenting on ecological issues, and I'm so happy that this year we have an entire panel of social ecological systems. And yeah, you also recommended me last year to read or reread, maybe I've already read them, the papers on Earth system modeling, right? In JCR. It's really also inspiring work. Maybe we'll contact you again afterwards after presentation.
You know, Jan, I think this is an area I really want to explore more. It's almost like, for me, it's full circle. I started out an ecologist, then I had to do all this long route to try and work out what's going on in ecology, and now I can finally come back to where my heart lies.
Cool, yeah, because I'm rather more in ecosystem, right, and ecosystem modeling and stuff like that. That's really interesting, but yeah, we will see afterwards. Now the noise is quite loud here. I don't know if I can't hear you so well anymore because everyone is talking in the room.
Okay, is that better if I lean a bit forward?
Sorry, yeah, maybe we mute the micro here, or no, because I can't, simply, it's so much noise, I can't hear her anymore. So,
but maybe maybe there's a problem with my computer. Can anybody else hear me?
I hear you very, very. I hear you, but very, but it's so much noise in the room here.
Here's the speaker.
I know that, but good.
This microphone is for Teams, and this for the room.
Okay, so we really have to stand here.
The range of the microphone is 10 meters.
10 meters. Okay, so like I'm now standing here, it's okay.
But when the microphone will be in the room, the speaker is direct the microphone.
Yes.
I can hear you, Lee. Hello.
Oh, good. That's fantastic.
Birendra.
Hi, Birendra. I know your voice anywhere.
Lovely to see you. Lovely to hear
Yes,
you.
lovely to see you. Although we can't see you very well, we just see your lovely bookshelf.
I'm somewhere in the corner.
Oh, there you are. We could just see you. Oh.
Should we start actually? It's now already 46.
Yeah, sure. Let me just share my. So first of all, let me welcome everybody.
Yes.
I'm going to be.
So maybe silence here. We can start so that we can start the panel.
Yeah.
I hand over to Lee. I will be chairing here in the room. Lee is online. She's the main chair of the session, and she welcomes you, everyone, I think now. Thank you.
Yeah. So welcome everyone. I can see the latecomers coming through. Hello there. And lots of familiar faces. It's really great that I can kind of see some of you. Just to welcome you to this chair on social and ecological systems. There's going to be 4 of us speaking today, and we've decided that we would like to have 2 of us speak first and then questions, and then the other 2 and then questions again, to give us a chance to, so that we're not too far away from the first speaker when we have questions. So our people today are myself. I'll be talking about On Playing God and why we should be like Bhaskar, not Peirce, when it comes to systems theories, etc. We've got Yun Seo Huang, who's going to talk about what critical realists say about ecocide. Then we'll have some discussion. Then we'll have Jan Zumo-Berhus, who will be talking about the causal power of the possible, forests, climate change, and dialectical critical realism. And finally, we'll have Martin Evenden, who's talking about integrating animal welfare into critical realism's concerns. I'm going to ask Jan to keep time for us, Jan, if that's okay.
Okay.
So we've got until 1:30. So if you can sort of, so how long does that give us each to talk? It's probably about 20 minutes to talk each.
So yes,
is that right?
20 minutes, as I've heard, it's 20 minutes. So we have 1 hour and 20 minutes of talk in total, and then this would be 20 to 25 minutes in total of Q&A.
Great. Okay, good.
Yeah.
So if you could just keep time for us, Jan, and I will just share my slides quickly.
Then I will interrupt you briefly, maybe 5 minutes before. So after 15 minutes, is that okay?
That's perfect. Okay, again, welcome to you all of you to this session. And it's right at the end of the conference. I hope you've had a great conference. I'm going to be talking about On Playing God, and I'll explain to you in a bit why I talk about On Playing God. And I'm going to argue that we should be more like Bhaskar and not Peirce when it comes to systems theory, computers, social engineering, and evolution. And to be honest, I would say that this is probably the most difficult paper I've ever tried to write in my life. But I think it's an important issue that needs to be addressed. And so I will basically be speaking to my slides, and then of course I can share those slides later. Okay, so in this paper, I will try to explain a key mechanism that is constructing our current demi-reality. And in this demi-reality, we see a lot of social fracture, we see war, and we see a lot of environmental degradation. And that's why this theme is so that's why I'm in this theme, I guess, because we're talking about social issues and environmental degradation. Okay, and in this demi-reality, human beings create value by simply thinking that something is valuable, when the truth of it is that values are not simply a question of thinking. And there is a kind of moral reality that can demonstrate the error of our ways if we take the time to find out what it is. So what I'm arguing is that in this demi-reality, which is the world that we live in, it is simply true because it's assumed by everybody and by society that values are pretty much just in our heads. Okay, and so this is something that critical realists, I think, try to challenge. Okay, and so we can say that this demi-reality has powerfully influenced, and perhaps we could even say it's created, by the social media and by computers, and it's kind of like a mutual creation, I should say. The computers, all the algorithms are based on our values. They then create what we see in the world, and then those values, of course, sort of go back and create our computers. So there's this kind of circular motion with between values, computers, and social media. Okay, and I would argue that there's never before been such potential for certain entities to so powerfully influence, or even we could say socially engineer, society in their own image, by which I mean, in terms of their own values. And so here you start to see in their own image. I'm starting to draw on some Christian language, which plays into this idea of playing God. So in a way, our computers are, and the people who control them are functioning in a way like we might think of a god. So they're playing God. And I use the word playing because, I think they're not serious enough. And, relating back to Pascal's concept of we need to be more serious. We're not serious enough in how we deal with these sort of issues of social media, etc. Okay, so another way of talking about this playing God, you could say it's social engineering. And what does it mean? Well, it could be ethically questionable, but also we might say that this playing God or this social engineering might be for good ends. But at this point, so I'm not going to, because I need to rush a little bit. I'll just go on to mentioning that perhaps when we look at social engineering and the tool of it and how it's affecting our lives, we realize that there's a mix of kind of psychological know-how, and some might go so far as to say it's psychological weaponry, that we're actually, that our psychology has been used against us, if you like, and technology. So at this point, it's useful to consider the influence of Charles Sanders Peirce on this contemporary world of psychotechnology. So we know that Peirce was a polymath, and he coined the term pragmatism. And he was a polymath in many fields of science. And so this is kind of an idea of his architectonic. So he was interested in philosophy, epistemology, and scientific method. As critical realist, that's where we're most familiar with him. But he was also sometimes called the original experimental psychologist. He was very interested in evolution, and he in fact brought evolution into his philosophy. In fact, all of these things he sort of relate to his philosophy. I'll show you in a minute. So he was very closely linked to computers. And one of his students, in fact, designed the first electronic computer. And some people argue that Peirce may have actually been the one to draw the diagram, even though his student got the credit for it later. And he was, of course, very involved in algebra and set theory. And he talked about God. And I'm arguing in this paper that all of these things together have contributed to his philosophy, his scientific method, and likewise, those things have fed back into computers, evolution, God, etc. Okay, so he's a polymath, and I think one of the mistakes of some philosophers trying to understand Peirce is, he's got this huge book of collected papers, and then you get these little kind of other books that draw out, okay, this is Peirce's philosophy, this is Peirce on psychology, or maybe this is Peirce on algebra and set theory. And what I think the mistake that we've made is to not see that he actually uses all of these together, and we can't really understand them fully unless we understand that. Okay, so God and man as computer programmers. So Peirce stated, and so you just have to bear with me with some of these statements, and I'm wondering if I'm not going to finish this whole presentation for you today, but anyway, if anybody wishes me to acknowledge that a logical machine reasons no more than any other machine. I do not know why I should not gratify him. That seems to me a matter of words. The result which the logical machine turns out as a relation to the data with which it is fed, which relation may be considered from the point of view of whether the former could be false, so long as the latter is true. That is, all there is of the facts of the case, and whether it is called reasoning or not, I do not care. All that I insist upon is that, in like manner, a man may be regarded as a machine, which turns out, let us say, a written sentence expressing a conclusion, the man-machine having been fed with a written statement of facts as premise. Since this performance is no more than a machine, then a machine might go through, it has no essential relation to the circumstance that the machine happens to work. Oh, hang on, what's happening there? While a man happens to work by an ill-understood arrangement of brain cells, and if there be room for less, still less to the circumstance than man thinks. So one of the things that I will assume in this presentation is that the giver of the written premise, in the case of the human machine, is for Peirce God, and the giver of the written premise in the case of the computer machine is a human. So for Peirce, the way he understood his philosophy was really, he had God in there. And the way that he understood perception, the way that he understood a scientific method, he always had God there. And God is the one giving us our understanding. So just like humans give computers understanding, and then computers then take that understanding and create things with it, so God gives humans understanding, and humans then take that understanding and create reality with it. Okay, so if we compare this to Bhaskar says sorry, I have to go back to Peirce a bit here, a bit more. Analogy suggests that the laws of nature are ideas or resolutions in the mind of some vast consciousness. Okay, this is just me giving you proof about what I've just said. Who, whether supreme or subordinate, is a deity relative to us. I do not approve of mixing up religion and philosophy, but as a purely philosophical hypothesis, that has the advantage of being supported by an analogy. Yet I cannot see that beyond that support to the imagination is of any particular scientific service. So he's not like, he doesn't want God to define, he doesn't want his philosophy to be another way of doing religion. But he does think that the best way to understand what's going on is to kind of think of this vast consciousness or quasi-mind, which he also calls it. Okay, to the contrary, Bhaskar's reference for the universal laws is not some vast consciousness, but the world itself, which consists of laws, and I put that in inverted commas, in the form of tendencies, potentials, and powers, which are the results of universal structures and mechanisms. Okay, so Peirce, this idea that these structures and mechanisms, these rules, these laws are pretty out there in the mind of God, so to speak. For Bhaskar, they're in the world. Okay, so Peirce's realism compared to Bhaskar's realism. So Peirce's quasi-mind is his realist ontological answer to the question of the something more. And that something more is, what is it that explains the empirical? So for critical realists, the something more is the structures and mechanisms inside the world. The element that is surplus, so it's the element that's surplus to the empirical, and which the nominalists think is not real. Now, for Peirce, he called nominalists what we critical realists would call irrealists. Okay, so nominalists think that structures and mechanisms are not real, for example, because we only know about them through our theories, which we develop in our minds. So for Peirce, mind is not about power. It is not necessarily connected with an organic brain. It is also found in the work of bees and crystals, amongst other things in the natural world. In fact, he assumes that this mind has a great deal of power, since through its habit, it can create matter. Okay, he states, I suppose matter is merely mind deadened by the development of habit. The one intelligible theory of the universe is that of objective idealism, that matter is effete mind, which means mind that doesn't behave itself, inveterate habits becoming physical laws. And so he appears to be saying, which think about the computers here, that there's this mind with these laws, and then these laws are sort of acted out as like a habit. And in so doing, they create matter. So matter is created out of the godlike mind. So this perhaps seems bizarre until one realizes that he supposes that the quasi-sign is like a jacquard loom. Now, the jacquard loom is a weaving loom that is seen as a precursor to the computer because it uses punched cards. Okay, and these punched cards are analogous to this quasi-mind of Peirce. And in those days, they used these punched cards to weave cloth to certain designs, and that's analogous to material reality. So this approach is visible in Peirce's version of the theory of truth by the use of a word that is often used in the Bible, namely imputed, such that for him, these symbols are those, the ground of whose relation to their objects is an imputed character, which are the same as general signs, and these may be termed symbols. So this word imputed is found in Christian theology in the phrase imputed righteousness, which suggests that the righteousness of Christ is imputed to believers, that is treated as if it were theirs through faith. So the quasi-mind for Peirce, therefore, ultimately imputes the symbols of the truth. But more than this, because the ideas, similar to Kant's categories, are real, thus unlike Kant, they're not merely psychological ideal. They actually, through their habit, arrive at the dynamical object, which is the material manifestation of the ultimate truth of the quasi-mind in the material world. So it's a great irony in the following quote, which I'll give you in a minute, given Peirce's commitment to realism, because note how Peirce therefore admits that perhaps this material object is therefore not real, but rather a fiction. And that's so interesting for us in terms of sort of like virtual reality. So the computer creates a virtual reality through this information, which originated as these punched cards, which Peirce, originally sort of envisaged was similar to how God kind of creates reality. Okay, so Peirce says we must distinguish between the immediate object, i.e. the object as represented in the sign, and the real. And he corrects himself, no, because perhaps the object is altogether fictive. I must choose a different term, therefore say rather the dynamical object, which from the nature of things the sign cannot express, which it can only indicate and leave the interpreter to find out by collateral experience. This idea that the dynamical object is the material manifestation of the ultimate truth of the quasi-mind, well, eventually becomes the ultimate truth of the quasi-mind, because there's an evolutionary process in between, is hard to take seriously, but perhaps one can at least understand where Peirce is coming from by supposing that he committed to a strong version of hypostasis, in which the word is the thing itself. And he says as much when he states the word, matter, is often employed with the more appropriate Greek word would be hypostasis. So he actually confesses quite openly that his version of philosophy is a kind of hypostasis.
5 more minutes.
Okay, thank you. So for Peirce, categories create a fictional, even he's not sure, reality at the level of the empirical and actual. So Peirce, as realist, therefore takes the anti-nominalist, anti-realist idea that the categories or theories of causation are real, not just unreal psychological projections onto the world like Kant, and tries to find a way for them to actually create a fictional reality at the level of the empirical and the actual. He does this because he is still at base a Humean positivist, that is, an actualist committed to the necessity of constant conjunctions, which he calls habit, to identify theoretical knowledge about the something more. He wants to work out why there are no constant conjunctions between our abstract ideas about things and causation, which Pascal calls an embarrassment faced by Humeans. So that is, he wants to explain why we can have an abstract idea of, say, the idea of the average dimensions of a generalized Air Force pilot, and yet it seems likely that no pilot has ever fit this estimation, or why we cannot predict events despite a good understanding of things in the open system of the world. Such is why we cannot predict the weather with 100% certainty. So in order to remain committed to the necessity from constant conjunctions, he has to assume that they will be achieved in some future date. And so here we get that pragmatism, that at some future date, if we talk about things and keep searching, we'll eventually find this perfect. We'll eventually find this perfect version of reality or truth, which is kind of related to God. So for Peirce, the perfect crystallization of quasi-mind, mind of God, is achieved in a distant future through evolutionary style advances. Okay, that's just quotes to back my theory. So in other words, Peirce's quasi-mind is his answer to Kant's categories. And they develop in an evolutionary sort of way. And that sort of measures. And so there you can see this idea of evolution coming through again. So at the time, people often thought of evolution as sort of leading to the ultimate human, and then, and human was still being perfected. So evolution became kind of the tool of God's perfection of humanity. And so he now transposes that to our understanding of knowledge. And that we are moving towards this ultimate perfection in our knowledge. Okay, and so really the problem is just that there's so much going on in the world. He also talks about this absolute chance, and it interferes with the ability of the mind, the quasi-mind, to create this perfect world. So you can see how there's sort of theological parallels, Christian theological parallels going on all the time here with Peirce's version of philosophy. And here I'm just going to probably end because there's much more I could say, but I can see I'm running out of time. And just to show in a real world example how Peirce's version works compared to Pascal's version. Okay, so, and here we come to climate change models. So a real world example is how over time our models about climate change would become better and better at predicting actual climate change until eventually they would predict it perfectly. Okay, so this is Peirce's version. The dynamical object and the final object would become one because the model would be a true likeness of reality. That our climate models might be able to get progressively better at predicting weather until ultimately giving perfect predictions is, I believe, perhaps... Hello?
Lee, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but you've been stuck on the bizarre slide for a long time, at least for people online.
Okay. How do I move that down a bit? Oh, I know. Maybe we need to go back to...
Actually, Lee, I've been noticing that, but I've just realized that there are some little arrows at the bottom, and we can actually navigate back and forward through your slides ourselves, which I've never seen before.
Brilliant. Thank you. I'm actually going far too forward here. So can you navigate to that yourself? Everybody, if you can't. Can the people there at in real time, can you see? Yeah. Okay. Good.
Slide.
Okay.
Which slide are you on, Lee?
I'm on a real world example, climate change models.
Thanks.
We can't see that here.
That's number 15.
It's suggesting that we can use the arrow one.
Yes. Now it's working, yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, is it correct? We saw the 15.
Number 15, a real world example. Yeah.
Yes, we saw the 15 slide.
Maybe 1 or 2 more minutes then.
Okay, great.
If it's okay.
Yeah, that's good. So how many? 4 minutes or 2 minutes or whatever. Anyway, a real world.
Time is already over, but now we have to move around maybe 1 or 2 minutes on this, and then we need to stop and continue.
Okay. So what I was saying was that there's a real world example is how so this is what Peirce would say, that our models about climate change would become better and better at predicting actual climate change until eventually they would predict it perfectly. So the dynamical model object and the final object would become one because the models would be a true likeness of reality. And here hear echoes of, how the positivists think. They're all hoping that ultimately they're going to get the perfect model. However, my perspective is more that, our models might get progressively better, but at the same time, it's unlikely that they will ever be perfectly good at predictions because of the open system, which is really hard to, predict. Thank you. So it seems more likely that the models will always have an element of uncertainty. And Bhaskar explains this. The actual cannot be both universal and empirical. Universality can be retained, but then empirical regularity must go, and all empirical regularity can be accepted, but then universality is lost. So we can be so particular that we can create that laboratory context where we can get empirical regularity, but then we can't be sure that that's going to happen out in the world, so we lose universality. So Bhaskar sort of said, oh, we don't really need to do that. Whereas Peirce is trying to bring these things together. So we have empirical regularity and universality. Okay, so Peirce's imputers, which are, I would say, a precursor to the computer, and his dynamical objects, which are precursors to virtual reality. So this is a remarkable feature of Peirce's efforts, and key to my discussion is that his efforts resulted in mathematics and ideas that contributed to the development of computers and also virtual reality. And he did this through his refinement of Boolean logic, through his collaboration with Alan Marquand, who I mentioned earlier, who was his student who devised the logical machine. So what is interesting is that the philosophical ideas of imputation and dynamical objects preceded the computer, basically influenced the development of our computer, and are essentially based on, on a sort of theologically based conception of perception and evolution. So when we use a computer, we could almost say, or actually say, that we are using the material manifestation of Peirce's philosophy. That's what I think.
So maybe.
Okay, next slide. How does Bhaskar, I'm now on slide 17, and this can be my...
So reading time is already over, and I've lost a bit of time already in the next slide.
I think that's probably a good place to end. And I'll leave it up to you to work out how Bhaskar is better, how his perspective would be better for us in protecting the world than Peirce's. Great, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to unshare it somehow.
Yes, and I ask the next speaker. Thank you.
So I am not able to unshare. Great.
Yes, thank you. Is it okay? So I'll just start. Hello, my name is Jun Seo Huang, and I come from the University of Hamburg in Germany, and today I'm going to talk about how critical realists can intervene in the ongoing ecocide debate, which is increasing at the global level. Oh, sorry. How can I move this document? Oh yeah, okay. That's great. All right, thank you. So so at the moment I'm at the exploratory stage of, trying to see how my analytical framework of ecocide and ecocide law can be incorporated into critical realism. And well, I have two reasons for that. So one is that because I have studied critical realism for a long time ago, and I wanted to follow Roger Matthews' critiques to conventional criminology that he framed as so what criminology. And then he said he wanted to revive this stream of left realism and want to see how far I can follow and also advance that stream. And also the second reason for doing this job, doing this work, is to see how far critical realists themselves can intervene in real world problems. Like, for example, I was really flattered to see yesterday's session on war, so that I can see, well, actually critical realism and also critical realists can have a say on the real world issues. So my presentation is divided into two parts. First, for those who may not be familiar with the context, I'm going to introduce the concept of ecocide and why ecocide law has emerged as sort of a solution to global planetary crisis claimed by some activists and also lawyers groups. And then I'm going to move on to the second part where I'm going to see how far I can incorporate this, how far I can bring critical realist views onto the analysis of ecocide law, ecocide. So yeah, so the ecocide law, so the concept of ecocide, simply to define, it means mass environment destruction. But I'm going to give you a detailed definition of ecocide later. But it was initially coined by Arthur Galston, who was a biologist during the 1970s, and he was actually the one who found, as a natural scientist, he found the impact of chemicals on the life of vegetables. So his findings were sort of used by the UK and the US military, and they were the ones who developed these kind of, oh, you cannot see the pictures, but so this is a picture, sorry for it's really dark, but it shows the picture of the Agent Orange, which is a defoliant. Or it's really, really dark, sorry. So there's a plane, and that's fine. So hopefully there's a plane, and spreading, defoliant called the Agent Orange. So there were a number of defoliants called, well, Agent Orange, Agent White, Pink. All these defoliants were used to kill rainforests in Vietnam. So where so-called the Viet Cong or communist soldiers were hiding, and also the U.S. military used that to kill these forests so that villagers are forcibly moved to urban areas where support for the U.S. military was strong. So it was a punishment on soldiers, but also an enclosure movement forced by the U.S. military. So the militarized use of these chemicals against nature and also human was highly criticized as ecocide. And then following that critique, there were a legal and also social movement to criminalize these kind of hostile use of chemicals and also weapons against the environment. And then at the global level, there were proposals to criminalize ecocide. So the UN International Law Commission considered environmental destruction as an international crime, but that debate was dropped in the 1990s. And then the International Criminal Law, so-called the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, was agreed in 1998. But by then, environmental destruction was only criminalized in the context of war crimes, saying that so the Rome Statute regulates environmental crime as a crime if those environmental destruction is too much excessive in comparison to military purposes. So in other words, if military benefits can be balanced with environmental destruction, it can be justifiable. So we are living in this world now, but also now there are renewed campaigns that especially try to target corporate accountability. For example, like fossil fuel companies' responsibility in the context of climate change. So there is a global and also national campaigns to criminalize ecocide as an independent international crime, alongside with other four categories of international crime that the International Criminal Court is dealing with. So I'm going to talk about that a bit more. But at the moment, so at the ICC, the International Criminal Court, there is a discussion going on regarding the criminalization of ecocide. So there were 3 Pacific Island countries, Vanuatu, including Vanuatu, I forgot Vanuatu and other countries, Fiji and other countries. They submitted a formal proposal to criminalize ecocide as the 5th international crime, saying that it needs to be criminalized. Environment destruction needs to be criminalized so that the global society can impose accountability and responsibility on the powerful groups that cause that should be attributable, culpable for climate change and other environmental destruction. So the renewed campaign to criminalize ecocide was informed by the outbreak of this Deepwater Horizon spill oil crisis in the US, where the BP, the British Petroleum, knew that there was a high possibility of environmental pollution, like this catastrophic environmental pollution, but they actually ignored that the likelihood of this kind of accident. So the accident happened, but one of the problems with these kind of environmental pollution is that the legacies of the environmental pollution, like the use of Agent Orange in Vietnam as well, they are long-standing and very much widespread. So the size, it is really difficult to estimate and calculate the scale of criminal responsibility associated with this kind of environmental pollution. So by criminalizing ecocide at the global level, especially using the ICC as a primary forum, these campaign groups try to ban sort of excessive environmental destruction. And they have proposed these campaign groups, especially those called the Stop Ecocide International. They have proposed this definition: ecocide as unlawful and or wanton acts committed with knowledge that there is substantial likelihood of these kind of consequences. So now this definition was submitted to the ICC, and also this definition was also reflected in some regional and national discussions on the criminalization of ecocide. For example, the European Union recently passed their new environmental crime directive, which has a clause, as a symbolic clause, not an operational clause, but still, which says environmental destruction, environment damage comparable to ecocide should be criminalized. So this is the first time that the European Union used that. And also now the EU is kind of promoting its member states to support the global criminalization of ecocide at the ICC level. So these campaign groups are saying, oh, well, there is a good development here in the ecocide debate. And if we do that, we can move on to a next chapter of environmental governance and environmental law and also criminal law, given that criminal law has been quite silent on environmental crime, comparatively focusing on street crimes and also property crimes. So we are sort of hearing these kind of positive news. So this is a good story, I would assume, as a green criminologist, but also there are a number of questions around this definition also, not to mention the colonial structure of the global criminal justice system. For example, like the ICC, International Criminal Court, has been criticized for their legitimacy and also effectiveness in preventing and actually prosecuting international crimes. So far, there are 4 types of international crime: war crimes and crimes against humanity, the crime of aggression, and what else? Sorry, genocide. Thank you very much. I was going to talk about that, but as we are witnessing now, there have been only 3 genocide cases officially addressed by the UN and also the ICC. So the ICC, so there are a number of questions. Also, those who have been punished by the ICC are all Black, except for one person, maybe. And then that one person is Serbian. So now there are no critiques imposed on the role of the ICC in actually perpetuating this colonial power, and also because the US and Russia, China, and some strong countries, including Israel, are not signatories of the ICC. there is also a question on the effectiveness of the ICC in preventing what those countries are committing in the context of mass environmental destruction and also their complicity in these kind of crimes. So one of the questions around ecocide, around the ecocide debate is that even if we include ecocide into the Rome Statute, would it be effective and also possible to actually, prevent and punish those commit ecocide? Well, campaign groups say yes. As also a member of the campaign groups, I would say yes, but also there are questions of how. So that's where I want to incorporate, critical realist views into my analytical framework of ecocide. This is the analytical framework of ecocide that I am trying to develop. Hopefully, I'm still writing, so I hope I can present someday later. But at the moment, I am trying to identify 5 types of ecocide. So we can see we are experiencing various empirical events. So at the empirical level, these, for example, forest destruction in Ukraine, atomic bomb, the use of atomic bomb in Japan, the dam collapse in Laos, or everyday roadkill. They are all different events happening in different settings. But if we can develop our logic based on critical realism, so at the actual level, we may identify tendencies, so-called ecocidal tendencies. So and then we go to the real level. Hopefully I can, based on scientific logic, reasoning, hopefully I can identify the structural powers that allow or maybe stop these ecocidal tendencies. So this is how I try to apply critical realism to my ecocide framework. But so based on that, this is what I can present at the moment. So 5 categories of ecocide. First one, ecocide as punishment, especially so ecocide as a war tactic, or sometimes as punishment, like the use of Agent Orange by the US military on Vietnamese soil, the Israeli use of seawater in the Gaza Strip to find Hamas soldiers, but also kill the land. And so ecocide punishment may mean wartime environmental destruction, and also ecocide as collateral damage may include toxic legacies of military training, experiments and weapon testing and production and expansion of military bases. So the first category of ecocide as punishment, has been to some extent criminalized by the Rome Statute and also environmental criminal law at the national level. But the ecocide as collateral damage has been sort of sidelined from those criminal lenses, which still they are interconnected, because to wage war, you would need weapons. And by producing weapons, you cause environmental destruction. So they are all interconnected, but in the realm of law, they are divided. Yeah? And then the third category of ecocide here, everyday and slow onset ecocide, we can see, I put number of examples in there. So for example, like roadkill, state facilities, mega project like dam construction, and industrialized farming that kills millions of animals every day. But interestingly, even though ecocide means mass environmental destruction or the destruction of species, industrialized scale of farming is actually exempted from criminal liability, or actually they are justified as everyday practice of life, the human lifestyle. So there are also other types of so what I can frame as everyday ecocide. And then the fourth category, maybe 5 more minutes. 5 minutes, yeah, okay, thank you. So yeah, the fourth category is industrial accidents, and they are somehow criminalized by a national law. And then the fifth category is ecocide, the nexus of ecocide and genocide. So ecocide and genocide are happening at the same time. So sorry. This is my analytical framework ecocide, and then the question is there any way to break the cycle of ecocidal tendencies? So far, for example, like the criminalization of ecocide mainly focuses on holding individual perpetrators accountable for what they do. But can we actually break the cycle of ecocidal tendencies? That's what I want to ask. Because even if we, for example, even if we signed the Genocide Convention in 1948, we are still witnessing this cycle of mass violence empirically seen in different settings. So that's where I think critical realists can intervene. Especially, I'm reading Bhaskar and Roger Matthews' critical realist criminologist. So Bhaskar, especially, I like the idea of Bhaskar's idea that science is for human emancipation. So that's my beginning point to engage with critical realism. As Bhaskar said, science is for emancipation from slavery or slavery-like relations. And that's where I want to apply. I'm not sure whether this is a good point to use that, but here we go. So human as the four-planar social being, and Bhaskar says A, B, C, D. So there are four realms of relations that function as context that humans are dependent upon. So one of the planes is the plane of material transactions with nature, and that's where I see critical realists can intervene, can view the ecocide debate as a point to think about how we can transform slavery-like relations that mainly consider the plane A, and then once we, for example, criminalize ecocide, can we actually break the cycle of ecocidal tendencies? And what does it mean for other planes? For example, like if we stop, if we stop eating meat, or if we stop buying stuff from industrialized farming, then what would that mean in the plane of, for example, inter and intrasubjective relations, like interpersonal relations? And then what would that mean to social structures if we stop roadkill, maybe if we can ever do that? So Bhaskar highlights that by using this four-planary social being framework, he wanted to highlight, as far as I'm concerned, he wanted to highlight how we can increase power A that transforms social structures to revert power 2 that function as oppressive power that penetrate and also reproduce so-called slavery-like relations. So far, what I see from the ecocide debate is that it is not. It is still important to impose individual accountability on environmental crime, but also we need to think about causal mechanisms that actually facilitate, and make people and social groups to destroy the environment. Maybe they don't think they are destroying the environment, they are using the environment in a different way. And that's where I am trying to explore the usefulness of critical realism. But also this is where I am stuck. I'm sort of stuck. So the absenting of absence, Bhaskar says, well, an event A can happen because of the mix of different causal factors, A, B, C, D. So for example, if I present a very preliminary analysis of ecocide as punishment, then there's capitalism as a structural factor that has been highlighted by critical realist criminologists as the structural force of crime. But then also we can think about lack of democratic control, like democratic control of war making, and also the minority of peace advocates. So people invest in more in weapon industries rather than peace education. And then personally, psychologically, politicians may just ignore other people, and label them as enemies. So like dehumanize them. And so these are sort of number of causes that combine all together to cause ecocide as punishment. Then the question that strikes me is, when does this stratified causation should end, or satisfactorily end? Yeah. And
I also ask you to find that.
All right, so thank you very much. Yeah. So these are the questions that I'm going to hopefully going to address, maybe in the discussion or maybe in my future writings. But thank you very much for my presentation.
Thank you very much to our two speakers. I think you can stay there. We have now 6 to 10 minutes for Q&A for you and Lee. Are there any questions, comments, points of discussion in the room or online? People online, just raise their hand.
Hi. So first of all, thanks to both presenters. I was really struck by the second presentation and the thoughts that you put into it and the questions you asked at the end. And one of the things that occurred to me is when you talk about those possible political and economic structures, there's also the legal structure, that idea that a corporate body is, you know, a legal psychopath, has no consequences for its actions and cannot be held to account for its actions because it can just be wound up at any point. And I was just wondering about your thoughts on that. And then going on to Lee's presentation, which again I really enjoyed. Lee flagged up on the first slide about that. Paraphrasing here, the way that those in power can possibly social engineer now society in line with their own values. And I was wondering if you could possibly say a little bit more about that.
Yes. So thank you very much for the question. So yes, now what strikes me as the ecocide debate is going on now, business leaders actually supporting the criminalization of ecocide. So that's where that's the point which interests me a lot. So now they are trying to act as solution makers to the global planetary crisis, while ecocide law has emerged as a solution to those crises that these people have caused from what critical criminologists would do. So that's why I want to argue that we need to go beyond their individual roles, discussions on their individual roles, and trying to break the cycle of ecocidal tendencies that they are also dependent upon. And in terms of legal structures, yes, so corporations have lots of exemptions, even though now climate change promises, agreements are trying to promote so-called corporate responsibility, but they are mainly enjoying, for example, in the relevant environmental law, all those environmental regulations are pretty much voluntary. For example, like now the European Union has passed their new sustainability due diligence directive, which is going to effect, I think, in 2026 or 7. But corporations are now responsible for checking their human rights duties and environmental safeguards, but they are all voluntary, so they're not really imposed on their compulsory responsibility. So that's why campaigners are trying to use or explore the usefulness of criminal law, because criminal law seeks to ban certain activities rather than environmental, not like environmental law or corporate law that gives flexibility and freedom for these corporations and other social groups. And so I'm trying to say, so I think law is a reflection of the political economy, like in the existing political economic structure. So that's where I'm trying to see how social structures are influencing the making of law, but also how the making of law or the operation of law influences or reproduces that structure. And in that against the factor of how we can practice or make ecocide law more effectively for, in my case, human emancipation, if it's human emancipation or emancipation from slavery-like relations, rooted in critical realism. That's, yeah.
Is there, maybe we have time for one more short question online?
Shall I answer my question quickly?
Yeah.
Okay. Just to say thank you for that question, Steve. So I'll answer it as quickly as I can. So when Peirce talks about this quasi-mind, you might ask the question, well, how do we, as humans, know what the quasi-mind is thinking? And remember, Peirce doesn't make the quasi-mind just about mind. I mean, bees have it, crystals have it, and chickens have it. So the mind is kind of already imbued or imputed, or with the quasi-mind's mind. But in fact, what happens is that quasi-mind is in fact a reflection of human beings, and it's a reflection of their own values. And so you have kind of a hidden sneaking in of values into the philosophy, and those values will then reflect the person who is who's coming to those conclusions, thinking of terms of value as being a kind of knowledge. You have knowledge about value. And so, here we fit into some of the feminist philosophies which say, okay, so knowledge in a patriarchal world tends to reflect the values of the sort of middle class white male, or the dominant voice, whoever that might be. It could be a black male in black countries, I guess. So there's a hidden kind of secret. The values are secreted in a hidden way in Peirce's perspective. And in a pretty much analogous way, when we use computers, those algorithms, which are in the mind of God, they also secrete these values, these dominant values, almost magically without us noticing. And Bhaskar helps us to avoid that problem, because he starts with values, but he always says these values are changeable. They're not absolute. They're not part of this mind of God. And in fact, we are required ethically to check our values and check. We always come with values. So he's not going to suggest we can come up with new values, but he does suggest that we need to check our values in terms of their effects and how they relate to the world, and so the truth of them. So Bhaskar includes a search for truth in finding the values that ultimately create our world. But Peirce can't really. He has no way of changing his values. They're pretty absolute. That answers your question.
Thank you. There's no immediate question. We can also then take up your thoughts again after for the second round of presentation. So it's now me presenting. I will now mute this microphone. Maybe Lee, you can make the timekeeper this time. And interrupt me if I'm speaking too long, and you can open your presentation.
That's fine. So I give you 20 minutes, do I? Okay.
Exactly, yes, 20 minutes. Maybe can you open my PowerPoint?
Jan.
Yes, I'm Jan, yeah. Yeah, so maybe I can already start. Yeah, hello, welcome everyone. I'm a PhD student in geography in Switzerland. Thank you. Okay, yeah, so I'm a PhD student in geography in Switzerland. And I've been already presenting on the same topic at last year's conference. Maybe you can you make this a bit smaller here? Or exactly, yeah, no, like that, yes. That's great, thank you. So I've been already presenting on the same topic last year. As I remember, it was also Friday, last day. Only 3 people, I think, were in the audience. Lee Intralia, Lee Price, and Doug Porporos, and someone else. And I'm really happy to be here again to continue on this topic. I'm working on my PhD on forest and climate change. And I think especially dialectical critical realism can make a big point here also on this topic of forest and climate change. I'm also really happy to have here this year one entire panel on questions of ecology and socio-ecological systems. And I think critical realism, especially dialectical critical realism, can make an argument here, especially what I want to develop also on the notion of the possible, what future is possible with regard to climate change. So maybe first a few words on forest and under climate change. As you all know, we are in a phase of rapid anthropogenically caused climate change. On the one side, on the other side, when you look at forest ecosystems, these ecosystems have a really low adaptive capacity. This means that forests can adapt only quite slowly to changes in the abiotic environment. And this is mainly due because trees, which mainly compose forests, they have quite a long life cycle, right? It takes time until they reproduce and spread. And so when you look a bit at the natural science part of all this, so I'm a social scientist, as you will see in a minute. When you look a bit at the natural science part of that, you find a lot of research on this topic of forests and climate change, but you also find a lot of papers actually on uncertainty, nonlinearity, and then especially complexity. And maybe just scan through briefly these titles, and you see there is a lot of uncertainties here with regard to the future with regard to the future, so the forests under climate change or under a changed climate. This uncertainty on the one side is had its origin in the fact that it's really hard to model actually on a local scale climate change, and especially the reactions of forests to these changes in climate. But on the other side, of course, we do not know how global climate change will develop in the next few years and decades. And this is especially also due because we cannot predict or determine in any way actually global CO2 emissions, right? And this is really hard to say how global CO2 emissions in the future will develop. And at least for me, what has happened in the US in the past months has given kind of a final blow to the idea that we can in any way be sure that CO2 emissions will decrease in the next decades, or actually decrease to the level that is necessitated. So it's really a big question. What will happen actually to forests under climate change? And if you translate that a bit into critical realist terms, I mean, you can really speak here kind of open systems, right? Climate change is, the global climate system is an open system, but when you look also at rather local forest and forest management on a local scale, you really can speak here of open systems, right? And I'm really interested actually now in my research, how do foresters, or how do we also as society deal with this open system, with this actually being within a world of change from the point of view of a forest manager or foresters, actually where you do not have this Archimedean point of view, where you do not have this God's eyes point of view, and you can look at how forests will evolve, how forest ecosystems will develop in the next few years or decades, and then act. No, that's not possible. It's always, we are really in a world of change, and forest managers are also within a world of change in which they are in a need to act right now. And here I'm really also inspired by thoughts, by Scar's thoughts in Dialectic, the Pulse of Freedom, on change, on the notion of change, on the notion of time and temporality and the future especially, because as it says there in Dialectic, the Pulse of Freedom, he says, well, the future can be conceived of as a shaped possibility of happening, of coming to be determined. And here, of course, he doesn't want to say that the future is determined, but he rather wants to say, I think, in my reading, that the future is not completely random, that it's not completely contingent, but there are causal forces. There is causality at play in how the future is shaped. And if you have a bit of a critical realist understanding of causality in mind, you see also, I think, what he meant by that. Because also we, as human beings, through our embodied agency, we have the causal power to shape the future. We may be said to contain possible futures within us, as he said it in this book. Again, he doesn't want to say that we, as human beings, can do whatever we want, right? That we can actualize each possible future. Rather, I think, again, here we need to remind us that we are in a limited moment. We are really in a limited context in which we are acting, and you can really apply this, I think, to forestry now under climate change. You do not really have this. You're really, as a forest manager, you're really acting within a very limited context, where we have a limited knowledge about the future, and where there are many causal powers, especially also biophysical causal powers at play in a forest at a local scale. And then I think this really moment where you need to act, where one is in the need to act, where one is forced to act, is captured quite well by Bhaskar, by this notion of the ecological moment. So he's saying that we are always already acting, right? And so he speaks about this generally, but I think really also with regard to climate change, I mean, we're always already acting, even if we're not doing something about climate change, we are already acting, right? And I try to kind of operationalize this idea of axiology, of the ecological moment in my PhD through this notion of the possible future, the possible or possibilities, and generally it's also quite prominent, I think, here in these quotes here. I think it's quite a good notion actually to capture this moment, this very moment in the present, which each one of us is facing always, right? We are always facing kind of a world of possibilities, not only ontologically speaking, what can happen, but also what can we know, and especially then also, of course, also what can we do. And I now try, in my PhD, I try to apply these thoughts or kind of use it as a lens to think through my case, my empirical case, where I'm doing research, field research, and this is a region in the Swiss mountains called Valais. So you see, it's really a region in the mountains. And what you should know about this region is maybe that there has been, so it's already quite dry and quite warm in summer, already 2 days without climate change, and quite cold in winter, quite snowy in winter as well. What has been observed in this case is in the past years, and that's what you see on the picture here, on the picture that you've already seen on the title slide, is that there is kind of a gradual tree dieback. So trees are dying. These trees there in the center of the pictures are brown. They should not be brown. That's probably due to the summer drought of the previous year. And with climate change, of course, these droughts, the temperatures are expected to increase. And this raises now, of course, questions about how will the forests look like in the future? I mean, this is a question all over Europe. I mean, I know a bit less about the rest of the world, but all over Europe, this question is now asked: how will these forests look like in the future? Here in this case, it's really important. It's really it's a really important question because almost all of these forests, I think almost 90% of these forests are classified as so-called protection forests. So they protect the slopes of the mountains against erosion. And then the infrastructure, I mean, you see here a road here, but there's also, of course, there are also villages, there are also houses, other types of infrastructure. All these forests, almost all these forests are protecting this infrastructure against rockfall, against landslides, and then in winter against avalanches. So it's really a question: what will happen actually to these forests in the future? And I did a series of interviews with foresters in this region on this topic, actually, what will happen to these forests. But maybe I will first show you a bit what actually science, natural science, is telling us in Switzerland about the future of such forests. Because we have really such nice tools as this model here. Actually, what you see here is the species distribution of a model, so a modeled species distribution with regard to climate change. It's the Norway spruce. Those who are a bit familiar with trees, and of course know that's really an important tree species. And you see here, under the current climate, is quite widespread tree species. When you look at the future, the end of the century, you see that it will, so if you know a bit the topography of Switzerland, it will rise quite high in altitudes. We have also, so that's one element. We have another element such as, that's really for forest managers, such a tool called Tree App, which basically says or predicts for each spot in Switzerland the dominant future species, tree species, as you can see here. So that helps or should help the forester to actually foster these tree species, even plant these tree species in his or her forest. I do not want to go into detail here, but you see, what I rather want to show you is that there is a quite clear, precise, certain picture of the future that these tools are producing, right? When we look also at the rather political and social requirements of forestry in Switzerland, we see quite similar picture. I brought here an extract from the forest law. A quote from actually the first principle of forest management in Switzerland is that forests are to be managed in such a way that they can fulfill fulfill their functions permanently and without restriction. When we talk about these functions, these ecological functions, it's exactly what I've been describing before about these this protective function in the mountains especially. In brackets, there is this notion of sustainability also in the forest law, and this is a quite important notion, of course, in forestry about sustainability. Sustainability, the idea has its origin in forestry in the 19th century or 18th century, sorry, 18th century. In this case, now it means, of course, that you adopt, as a forest manager, you adopt this long-term view, you adopt this planning, long-term planning, this idea of long-term planning. And again, you see here, this is there is a quite precise, clear picture of how the future is imagined from this side of rather the legal and political, social maybe requirements as well. So as I said, I've done a series of interviews with qualitative semi-structured interviews in this region in Valais. And what I see there is a kind of a different picture of how the future is, or how with this change is actually, how this change is actually dealt with. And I brought you here an extract from this one of these interviews, where I really was talking to the forester. Well, how do you deal? What do you do with regard to climate change, or how do you conceive of this future? And he told me then, and here I quote, I want you to listen to what he told me. He said, well, you have to simply learn to deal with this change. After all, we do not know whether, and now it doesn't matter which tree species I mentioned, we do not know whether walnut, ash, or lime trees will still be viable in 50 years' time. We really don't know, because that has all happened so quickly. And here he's referring to this tree dieback that he has been experiencing over the past years and decades. But you cannot say that because we do not know what will happen, we won't do anything. That would be the worst thing we could do. You can't always have the feeling that the measures you are trying now will be successful. A bit later in the interview, he told me, well, things simply go on in my life, right? And then there is another problem. There is another problem which is solved with a new solution, so that things simply can continue. So you see, this world is really dominated by this uncertainty about the future. He does not know which tree species will survive. He does not know which if his measures will be successful or not, because that's basically only something that you can see in 20, 30, or 50 years time. And so there is really this big uncertainty, but still, and this I really want to emphasize, still he is acting, he is doing something, right? There is a form of practice here that he is pursuing. And he's also reflecting upon that. I think also Margaret Archer's idea of reflexivity, kind of this idea that you play or think about your own role in the world in relation to other elements.
Yeah.
Yes?
5 minutes.
Thank you. And this idea of reflexivity, right? He's reflecting upon his own form of practice. So it's not completely a random form of practice, right? He doesn't say that, well, I just do whatever I want, right? That's not what he's saying. But still, I think this form of practice is really kind of structured by this openness of the future, by this, what I call the possible, right? What is possible in the future. So I would really argue also that this notion of the possible is kind of exerting its causal power also on this form of causal practice that I observe here in my field. So basically what I want to show you here is that there's kind of this contradiction between this future imagined or future predicted by these models, or this modeled future by these things, these elements, these tools I presented before, but also the legal requirements, and the practice actually that I'm observing in the field. And I interpret actually this contradiction also a bit from our kind of Western modern idea that we can control nature, that we can predict the future in any way. And so what you've seen before is actually exactly this idea on the slide before, that the future can be kind of predicted, imagined as events. So it's basically what you have seen on the slide before are events, right? The future is imagined as events, a constant conjunction of events, even if you want this practice, this form of practice that you see here in this quote, I think there is no constant conjunction of events, right? There is no, he really, in this process of change, there is no constancy in his way of practicing. So this idea that you can imagine the future as a constant conjunction of events, or actually basically at events, this is of course what Pascal would have called actualism, right? That you can imagine the future as something given, as something precise. There is no alternative to it, basically. There is no possible future in that. And with this, I want to conclude or basically argue that we need to think beyond actualism in this thinking of ecosystems, in this thinking of social ecological systems. And here I'm also relying on Lee's work on Earth system modeling. So Lee makes basically a quite similar argument that we need to think beyond this actualist thinking within the modeling or the thinking of the future under climate change. Here, in my case, I would really argue that, or really put forward that we need to bring in archaeology or agency back into really this need to act under an uncertain future, but also this depth, right? That things can be different than expected, that I try to also capture with this notion of the possible. And when we look a bit more at ecological change, forestry, sustainability also, I think we really need also to rethink the notion of sustainability, because what I experience much is also that the sustainability is kind of often imagined as an event, as kind of the answer to the question how the future will be. I think we really should reformulate this question into a question rather what future is possible under climate change. And this is rather than a question oriented towards process, the processual thinking, process thinking, and I think Pascal's dialectic can make here really a big a point, because he is thinking process not only as difference or change, not only in terms of difference, but also kind of randomness or openness. As a post-structuralist would do, but rather as a kind of also structured process, right? And I think forestry can benefit quite a lot here. And yeah, before I finish, I just want to remind, I mean, always when I speak about this topic of climate change adaptation, I think we should never forget actually also why we are in this situation in which this forest is, in which every one of us is with climate change. What are actually the causes of climate change itself? So I hope I stayed in time, and thank you very much for your attention, and then afterwards for your questions and comments.
Thank you very much, Jan. Well done. That was an excellent presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have now the next person. We are looking for Martin. Is Martin in the room?
Yeah.
Great. Would you like to take the floor?
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me just put my slides on. Okay. So, yeah, first of all, yeah, I'll just apologize for my slides. They're not as professional as other people's. And what I want to do is, yeah, it's quite straightforward, as you'll see. So, yeah, I'll just kind of get going. Okay, so as a movement in philosophy and social science, centered on ontology with implications for politics and ethics, critical realism is committed to making interventions in the world in order to improve it. So since its inception, informed by science, CR has expanded its ethical horizons, like deliberating over meta and normative ethical areas such as moral agency, moral realism and ethical naturalism, the value of being, emancipatory strategies and social justice. But these discussions have tended to like center on humanity, and like this anthropocentric bias has been noted by Gideon Calder, who's called for a realist ethics capable of encompassing the natural environment, including non-human species. Now, if you kind of go through the CR literature, more attention's been given to the environment per se than it has to animal welfare. Although there have been some brief discussions or mentions of animal rights. So, for example, Collier, Sayer, and Ash. But the only substantial contributions on this topic have come from Manu Kina with a study on identity formation in relation to ethical consumption through the content of its participants' concerns, and Mitchell, who's done a systematic treatment of the oppression of farmed animals using critical realist principles. Okay, so I think this is like where mainstream CR is at and where I think it needs to go. So for a movement that positions itself as progressive, committed to core values of love and flourishing, you know, I think it would do well to consider the plight of other beings and commit to absenting avoidable suffering. Okay, so why is animal welfare like a salient issue in the first place? So as many of you will be aware, there's a daily Holocaust that goes on, which most of us have been complicit in at some time or other. And according to Richie and Rosa, over 80 billion land animals are slaughtered each year. And this doesn't include animals that come from the sea and so forth. And the social and psychological mechanisms needed to facilitate this bear a striking resemblance to what Hannah Arendt called the banality of evil. Okay, so evil, according to Arendt, becomes banal when it acquires an unthinking and systematic character. Evil becomes banal when ordinary people participate in it, build distance from it, and justify it in countless ways. There are no moral conundrums or revulsions. Evil does not even look like evil. It becomes faceless. Okay, so this is what's going on every day, largely unchallenged. So what is it that enables this public apathy? Okay, so it revolves around the social and psychological mechanisms used to resolve a moral dilemma known as the meat paradox. So how can I be a good person and still eat meat? And the underlying ideology of carnism that supports it. So people have a natural capacity for empathy, and people generally care about animals, and yet they still consume meat. So this has the potential to threaten their self-perception and lead to a tension known as cognitive dissonance. Okay, so cognitive dissonance is a feeling of discomfort when there's a contradiction between values and behavior. So as such, there are three ways to overcome it. Okay, so we can change our values so they're consistent with our behaviors. We can change our behaviors so they're consistent with our values, or we can distort our perceptions of our behaviors so they appear consistent with our values. Okay, and most meat consumers report both caring for animals and continuing to eat meat, which means that as they're not changing their values or behavior, moral disengagement is the most common means adopted, which has the effect, which comes at the expense of blocking our empathy. Okay. Now, when moral disengagement is successful, our empathy is blocked through sophisticated forms of self-deception, which are facilitated by an underlying ideology called carnism. And these are what will be the subject of explanatory critique. Okay, so Joy argues that carnism is it's an ideology that conditions us to eat certain animals rather than others, and it hides the fact that it's a choice. Okay, so people tend not to question it because it's become so ingrained, so normalized and invisible that most people don't even know it exists. Okay, so she makes the point that it remains unnamed, which helps us to avoid thinking about it, and it's the default position so that like veganism and vegetarianism are considered to be alternative choices. And it's an ideology because its beliefs and practices are so ingrained that they're taken to be natural and given. So this is its symbolic invisibility. And she goes on to point out that it's a violent ideology because you cannot procure meat without slaughter. And this ideology functions to enable people to blindly engage in inhumane practices. But at some level, though, you know, we know deep down what goes on. And every now and again, there are cracks in the system that enable reminders to come through. Okay, so the meat paradox dissonance is elicited through triggers. So, for example, reminders of like that food comes from an animal and so on. And there are different strategies for dealing with this dissonance. So these can be divided into indirect strategies, which focus on avoidance, and direct strategies for post-trigger scenarios. Okay, so naturally, prevention is better than the cure. Okay, so with indirect strategies, they kind of outsource dissonance to society. And in a similar way to what Bauman argues with proximity in the Holocaust, Joy notes that the main indirect strategy relies on practical invisibility or being out of sight, out of mind. So slaughter occurs in what Foucault calls the interior of the exterior. There's very little media coverage on this kind of thing. We use kind of euphemistic labels, so livestock, for example. And when it comes to meat packaging, like care is taken to avoid showing things like eyes and tails. Okay, now the most common direct strategy reported is the denial of qualities to farmed animals. Okay, so it's denied that they're sentient, it's often denied that they suffer pain, and it's often denied that they have intelligence. And this kind of strategy serves to distance us from animals in terms of what Vetterson calls psychic proximity, which is where we identify with someone or something in terms of how close it is. Because the more closely we identify with someone or something, the more empathy we have. So obviously there are a number of studies that kind of disprove these ideas, and just from coming into contact with farmed animals, you know, it's easy to tell that they're sentient and suffer pain and so on. Okay, now the second direct strategy comes through rationalizations, which are justifications. Okay, and Joy identifies three in particular: normal, necessary, and natural, that function as myths that legitimize carnism and help to alleviate discomfort. Okay, so first of all, we've got normal. As the social norm, eating meat is so heavily ingrained. Eating meat is what everyone does. And this is reinforced through advertising campaigns and authority figures. So, for example, like teachers, parents, doctors. And, you know, if you don't eat meat, you're considered to be weird and you're constantly having to explain yourself. And there are also social constraints in the sense that in like so many social situations, there are no meat alternatives. Okay, so with natural, we're conditioned to believe that eating meat is natural, and there are biological and hierarchical justifications for eating animals, supported by scientific and religious interpretations of history. And while it's true that we've evolved to eat meat and eaten meat for millennia, we've also had like murder, rape, and cannibalism throughout that time, but we kind of don't use history to justify those practices. Okay, so eating meat is also seen as essential for our survival or health, because without it we can't get enough protein. So as such, you know, killing for the greater good is deemed to be acceptable. But this has been debunked by the American Dietetic Association, which is the leading association in the US, as well as by performances of like top sports stars. So at least in developed societies, it's not necessary for animals to suffer the way they do. And then Piazza et al. Have identified a fourth NICE based on the taste of meat, because which is our primary attachment to meat. And while yeah, meat might indeed taste nice, it's clearly a weak moral defense. Okay, so what does Spinoza have to offer in regards to all this? Now, while he was a speciesist, there are other conclusions that can be drawn from his naturalist system. Okay, so the reason we have a capacity for empathy is because we're open systems that imitate the effects of others. So, for example, emotional contagion through internal simulations produced by mirror neurons. Okay, and this can trigger the lowering of boundaries between the self and extend them into others. So Pfaff points out that when identities become blurred between self and others, it often results in empathic behavior that follows the golden rule. So ourselves are also extended through projective identifications, making us systems enmeshed in other systems that kind of like can distribute the self into our wider concerns. So as farmed animals are beings like us to a degree, their suffering triggers concern, but at the same time we have a desire to consume their flesh, hence the effort to block the empathy. Okay, so in Spinoza's system of thought, which is one of empowerment, emancipation comes from improving our personal strength, which he calls power of acting. And the key dichotomy here is activity, which is freedom, versus passivity. So what does it mean to be free? It means to act through internal rather than external causes, which means to be in control by knowing what you're doing. Okay, so what does that mean? We have what he calls adequate ideas, which are explanatory ideas and what follows from them. So, for example, if we have an understanding of climate change, we know what's necessary in order to reduce it. Okay, so when you're passive, you're moved by something, you're limited or moved by something external to yourself. Okay, so if we're engaged in practices which require self-deception, we're clearly not free. Okay, we're kind of beholden to passive effects. But if we overcome them, we reach a higher perfection and consciousness. So if you think about the matrix, it's kind of like red pill and blue pill. Okay, so while you sacrifice the taste of meat, you're free from deception and dissonance. And furthermore, if we can, it's better to interact with the world and act out of love, as the joys we get from this are the sources of energy necessary for our personal strength. So like our flourishing improves with the flourishing of others. Okay, so in terms of interventions, from the perspective of CR, just including animal welfare more in discussions on normativity and moral realism would help, as maybe would just having some more veg options at the conferences. But I want to focus on like educational strategies. So consistent with Spinoza's thinking, Catherine O'Brien uses a strategy called interdependence maps, and these employ retroductive thinking to explore interconnections and interaction with each other. So they do so by charting interconnections between ourselves, the environment, others, and history. So she provides an example through a piece of paper. Okay, so she talks about students generally suggesting that trees, sun, soil, and water are needed for paper made from trees. And this tends to be followed by the recognition that machines for tree cutting had to be invented, and then logs have to be moved and trucks have to be made to transport the logs. Then, of course, there are factories, factory machines that needed to be invented. They have to be run by people. Energy needs to run them. So we need kind of like water, energy, chemicals. And then students suggest the connections where paper is brought to the store. So you need to kind of get like trucks to move them. And then you need people to like work at the store. And like finally, you need people to actually buy the paper. So the idea is that students come to like appreciate paper more, so that they'll like value it more, conserve it, and ultimately recycle it. And these kind of habits of thinking help them to understand the difference between what O'Brien calls happiness and sustainable happiness, which is happiness that contributes to individual, community, or global well-being without exploiting other people, the environment, or future generations. Okay, and she provides an example where a simple and relaxing act, such as drinking a cup of coffee, can be placed within the context of a wider system. Okay, so we can reflect on who or what our life touches through that coffee. If we're drinking fair trade or direct coffee, that means that coffee producers have been compensated justly and the coffee was grown with regard for the environment. The coffee cup may be reusable or instead destined for landfill. The positive emotions are indeed important and contribute to happiness and well-being. But it's also important to reflect on whether the positive emotions derived from the coffee have come at the expense of other people or the natural environment. Okay, so these exercises enable students to complete what O'Brien calls sustainable happiness footprint charts. So these chart developments, such as like daily meals or social activities, in terms of the impact they have on themselves, others, and the environment. Okay, so contrary to what people might say, you know, these exercises help us to understand that food decisions are not private decisions. Okay, and just the last thing I want to mention is another idea consistent with Spinoza's thinking called Allport's contact hypothesis. Okay, so by coming into contact with outgroups, you can improve your empathy and understanding. And Abate has kind of suggested that this can extend to human-animal interactions, as people who've had more contact with animals are more likely to demonstrate concern for animal welfare. So his idea is that like, you know, teachers try and expose students to like farmed animals more to develop empathy. And while there are some obvious counter examples to this idea, so for example, slaughterhouse workers, they can potentially be explained. Okay, so have I been roughly about 20 minutes? Okay, well, I mean, I'll just kind of stop there. So
yeah, thank you so much. Yeah.
Right.
Sorry, I couldn't find my microphone for a second. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, it's fine.
That was excellent. Certainly food for thought, if excuse the pun.
Well, yeah, nice pun.
Good. Okay, I'm going to hand over though to Jan, because he can see who's in the audience to field questions.
Yeah, so again, if you have questions for people in the room, raise a hand, or online people also, of course, you can raise a hand or show another type of sign if you have questions to either Martin or myself. Yes, there's one question in the room.
Thank you so much for the two presentations. I wanted to applaud the second presenter. I really enjoyed this presentation, and I have very much look forward to reading your paper. I wanted to maybe raise two kind of maybe technical questions. The first one is that there may be a little bit it's not so obvious to me that you've drawn on a lot of the classic critical realist writings in your presentation. And I was just wondering whether you found any resources in the Bhaskarian kind of meta-reality writings, particularly on the point of self-consciousness, that is the sense of self, and his writing of, you know, self-witnessing and so on, whether that might have a role to play in your argumentation. And the second point, technical point really, was that you also referred to projective identification when you talked about empathy. And I wonder which kind of projective identification you're talking about. If you could elaborate a little bit. I am perhaps a little bit more familiar with Melanie Klein's projective identification, when she talks about we tend to project the bad parts of ourselves onto the others, and that kind of, you know, triggers some kind of a doppelganger effect, you know, how people kind of slip, you know, the bad parts of themselves onto the others. But perhaps you were talking about a different kind of a mechanism. Perhaps if you could elaborate a little bit. Thank you so much.
So this was for you, Martin, I think.
Okay, right, sorry. Right, so, yeah, can you just say the question about Bhaskara again, quickly?
The Bhaskara has this materiality phase in his philosophy when he talks quite a lot about self-witnessing, quite a lot about self-consciousness and the connection between the self and the other and the world and so on. I was just wondering whether you found any resources that that might be
yeah, okay. I mean, basically the idea being promoted is more in like what you call an extended self. But if you look at Bhaskara's ideas of meta-reality, like he goes further to what you might call what he calls the transcendental self, and he kind of talks about this idea of like co-presence, being in touch with being itself at this level. But yeah, I kind of think that this idea of a transcendental self, yeah, just doesn't really work. It's not feasible, and also, if you're kind of at that level, you've got to be kind of like engaging in, I don't know, super ethical behavior, but kind of extended self theories are kind of, yeah, quite relevant to this kind of, stuff I'm talking about. But here I was trying to connect it with like neurology. Okay, so there are kind of, recent developments in neuroscience, which kind of like connect like certain neurons firing in the brain with experiences of empathy. And yeah, I mentioned the guy Donald Pfaff. So yeah, he kind of argues that like, so say for example, if we're imagining like knifing someone, mirror neurons, what they do is they kind of like project a simulation in our brains fired by neurons of us performing that action. And when that happens, we've also got like cell assemblies which like have identifications between ourselves and others. And when you get that kind of excitation, like some information is lost, and the cell assemblies between ourselves and others, they actually kind of blur. And when this happens, empathic behavior where we follow the golden rule is likely to occur. So it's kind of like, it's trying to develop an idea of morality kind of through empathy. And then, yeah, and then second, with Melanie Klein, you talked about splitting, and yeah, I'm kind of, yeah, I'm not really kind of a believer in these ideas when it comes to self-deception. Yeah, I kind of prefer deflationary ideas to splitting, like the whole idea of kind of, I don't know, maybe the self-splitting and one self deceiving another self. Yeah, I don't think it's feasible, if that's what Klein is saying.
Thank you. Yes, there's another question in the room.
I would like to. I have a question for Jan and a question for Martin. I would like to ask for the first presentation. I like the predicament that you offered when it comes to predictive models on the one hand and what's going on in the ground. And I want to ask what you think dialectical critical realism or critical realism specific has to offer when it comes to, on the one hand, that we are very critical of predictive models and prediction, but we somehow need to know what's going to happen in the future. And on the other hand, there is a radical uncertainty in the field. So how do we avoid, on the one hand, the blanket rejection of prediction? And on the other hand, how does the radical uncertainty does not make us inactive, right? On the grounds that we don't know what's going to happen. So there is no point in action. And for my, I'd like to ask, I was thinking of what Peter Naes would describe as tunnel visions. And I fully agree with the critique of Carnes personally, but I think that the problem is isolating an aspect of oppressive systems like Carnes or patriarchy or whatever, right? What we can describe, for instance, a vegetarian tunnel vision, which is focusing only on one aspect of oppressive systems. So I would like to ask if you have any thoughts on this question.
Okay.
You want to respond first, or did I go first?
I don't mind.
I keep myself short because anyway we are almost, or we are over time. So first, I would not speak of radical uncertainty, right? There is some idea, at least where we are going, some direction, even if it's not definitely clear. I would not speak of radical uncertainty or complete randomness. And then still I would say also the absence of an action is a form of doing, right? Also not doing something is also a form of doing. So it's not possible actually in any way. We are doing something, and I think we should much more value this kind of form of a forest scientist has called that in my case a form of intelligent modeling through reflecting upon our roles within the world, of change in the moment, right? And I think much more value also that, and talk about that also publicly. Because once also maybe in 30 or 50 years time, we also want to speak maybe about responsibility, right? In the past. And when we value that much more in the present, I think this is already a big deal done. So I hand over, we can then maybe discuss afterwards during lunch. I hand over now to Martin.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, about the tunnel vision question. Yeah, obviously it's difficult to like transform society overnight, but I mean when you kind of think about the sheer scale of suffering that's unnecessary, I don't think it's a case of tunnel vision. Like if you kind of just imagine what's going on in these like food factories, I mean it's just medieval. So from the point of view of their experience, like if you're a person in a gas chamber or a pig in a gas chamber, I don't think the experience is going to be very different. Or if it's like a knife to your throat or a knife to the throat of an animal, yeah, I think the experience is going to be the same. So if I can understand, like in places like Cambodia, they have to do what they have to do, but I mean in developed societies, yeah, we really don't have to do this, especially in the modern age with technology. And it's not even just about their pain and suffering. If you think, like there've been talks on climate change, if we stopped eating meat, like I think that's the second largest contributor to climate change. And then when you go to climate change conferences, no one even mentions this. I presume even if we stopped using fossil fuels, just on the like emissions produced by like consuming meat, I presume climate change would still continue. So yeah, so I kind of well, from the perspective of the animals anyway, I don't think it's a tunnel vision.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I mean, I'm already getting signs here from people in the room that because lunch is waiting for us. I don't know, Lee, do you want to have a final word?
Well, just to say thank you, everyone. I've really loved these conversations and the presentations. And yeah, wish I could be with you all and have a great lunch. We'll see you next conference, maybe.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
And so for people in the room, Jana really asked me to remind you there is still lunch waiting for us also on the last day of the conference.
Martin, did you see the chat?
No.
Oh, I just said it's Priscilla, and I thought your talk was so brilliant, and I wondered if I could have a copy of your paper. And do you want my email?
Okay, yeah. I haven't actually like written the paper as such, but
No.
Well,
Are you going to?
Yes, I'm going to. Yeah, I'm going to try and write it
up.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, I'd endorse that too, Martin. Paul Morton speaking. I've sent a message to you on your chat. I thought your presentation was excellent, Martin. Thank you very much.
Yes, it was so brilliant. And hello, are you there still?
Yeah, and I'm still here.
Mine is p.alderson@ucl.ac.uk.